When the world warmed in a violent instant, coastlines drowned and memory blurred. What if the Younger Dryas did not just end an ice age, but erased a living empire at the water's edge? Imagine a seafaring power, harbors now buried under silt and silence. Were myths of Atlantis simply survivors, speaking softly about a real place? If ruins sleep on continental shelves, what might they tell us about a civilization older than history? As the Younger Dryas period came to a sharp and unexpected end, the world warmed in a way that would permanently reshape the face of the planet. Giant ice sheets that had once covered the northern lands began to collapse. Massive freshwater lakes, held in place by frozen barriers, broke open and rushed across valleys, plains, and forests. Sea levels rose quickly, faster than most would believe possible. Entire coastlines vanished under the rising tides. Shorelines moved miles inland. If people had lived there, and all evidence says they had, those towns, markets, and temples would now be lost to the waves. The land itself changed. Rivers shifted course. Ancient deltas filled with salt. Islands became hills. In less than 1,000 years, the Earth entered a new chapter. But what exactly did it leave behind? Could this violent warming have wiped out a real civilization? One so old it existed before writing, before history, and before the records we trust today. Plato wrote about a powerful seafaring city called Atlantis, one that vanished in a single day and night of misfortune. Many dismissed it as myth, but others asked whether it was based on a real place lost during a real flood, and if so, could the end of the Younger Dryas have been that flood? We now know that sea levels rose over 300 feet since the peak of the Ice Age. That means entire continental shelves, now underwater, were once dry, fertile land. Many of today's ports sit on coastlines that were once far inland. Could cities from an earlier time be hiding beneath the sea, buried in mud, sand, and silence? If so, what traces remain? What if the roots of early knowledge, mathematics, astronomy, stonework, and sailing, came not from scattered discovery, but from one forgotten source? Ancient flood stories from Sumer, Egypt, Greece, and even the Americas tell of a great disaster that drowned the old world. Are these stories fragments of real memory passed down for thousands of years? Many researchers think so. They say the survivors of a lost coastal civilization may have fled inland, carrying their knowledge with them. Could this explain why some of the earliest known cities appear suddenly with organized layouts and advanced skills? The clues are spread across ancient myths, sea level charts, and hidden lands beneath the water. To truly find Atlantis, or something like it, we must look where no scrolls survive. Under the ocean floor, we must search places that were once shorelines, now drowned by time. These forgotten edges may hold the key to an older chapter in human history. The Younger Dryas didn't just melt ice. It erased entire regions from the map. If Atlantis existed, the sea did not just swallow its stones. It buried its story. Long before Atlantis became legend, it was a story passed from priest to poet, from scroll to speech. The tale began with Solon, a respected lawmaker of ancient Athens. During his travels to Egypt, he visited the city of Sais, where learned priests preserved records far older than anything kept in Greece. There, he heard of a powerful island empire that existed beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. The priests told him this civilization once ruled parts of Europe and North Africa, but its pride grew too large. In a single night and day, it fell to the sea through earthquakes and floods. Solon planned to write the story down, but he never finished. His notes passed to his descendant, Dropides, who shared them with Critias, Plato's grandfather. Finally, Plato turned the tale into two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, framing it as both a warning and a mystery. But did he invent it, or did he preserve a real account? Scholars have long debated the details. Some say it was a moral tale. Others point to how specific the geography was. Atlantis, according to Plato, was made up of concentric rings of land and sea, with rich soil, metals, and engineering marvels. He dated its fall to around 9,000 years before Solon's time. That would place it well before Egypt's earliest dynasties. Could that align with the end of the Younger Dryas, the time when global floods erased coastlines and reset human settlement? If so, Plato's account may be one of the last surviving records of a lost age. His description of a powerful sea people, advanced in building and warfare, hints at a civilization that had once spread across ocean trade routes. Why would Egyptian priests invent such a detailed backstory if it held no truth? And why would Plato choose a specific location beyond the known world, rather than a vague mythical land? The island was said to lie in front of another group of islands, which themselves led to a great continent beyond. Was this simply poetic? Or did it reflect real maritime knowledge, passed down from an age before maps? The term, in front of the pillars of Heracles, may even describe a precise zone, the Atlantic shelves, between Iberia and the Azores. We often ask whether Atlantis was fiction, but what if the more important question is this? How much truth did Plato preserve from older sources? If he condensed fragments of memory, then perhaps Timaeus and Critias are not allegory, but echoes. They are not the beginning of the Atlantis mystery, but the final link in a much older chain. A chain that may have started on clay tablets in a library now lost beneath the sea. Could Plato's scrolls be our best surviving clue? A lighthouse text pointing us back to an ancient world that time and water have hidden? The end of the Younger Dryas marked one of the most dramatic shifts in Earth's climate since the Ice Age began. Around 12,900 years ago, after a long period of gradual warming, the planet was suddenly thrust back into near-glacial conditions. For over 1,000 years, temperatures stayed low, glaciers advanced, and life adjusted to the cold. Then, about 11,700 years ago, the ice retreated with astonishing speed. Ice cores from Greenland show this shift like a heartbeat on a graph, a sharp spike that marks the end of a frozen world. Lake sediments across North America and Europe tell the same story. In a geological blink of an eye, massive ice sheets began to collapse, releasing torrents of fresh water into the oceans. Sea levels rose quickly, not over millennia, but in violent pulses. Rivers carved new paths as their mouths drowned, and fertile plains vanished beneath the waves. Could entire coastal cultures have been swept away without a trace, their cities lost before even the first written word? Some researchers suggest a cosmic impact triggered the cold snap. Others point to a complex system of ocean currents and melting ice dams. Whichever mechanism is true, the evidence is clear. The end of the Younger Dryas was not gentle. It was a global disruption, a force capable of erasing any low-lying civilization. What stories might the survivors have told, and where did they go when the seas came for their homes? Today we can track these changes with ice cores, pollen counts, and sea level reconstructions. We can see how coastlines that once stretched far out now lie under hundreds of feet of water. If Atlantis had stood near those vanished shores, its harbors and temples could be buried in silt and hidden from view. The dates Plato gave for Atlantis match this upheaval surprisingly well. Could that be coincidence? Or was he preserving an echo of real events? The combination of fire in the sky and floods from melting ice may explain why so many flood myths describe both a great darkness and a rising sea. This was not just a climate change, it was a planetary reset, It forced humans to migrate, adapt, and start anew on higher ground. When we look at early civilizations rising soon after this period, we may be seeing not the dawn of culture, but its rebirth. The timeline of the Younger Dryas provides a clock against which these mysteries can be measured. It shows us when and how the world changed, and invites us to ask whether a real Atlantis could have stood on the edge of that lost map. After the sudden end of the Younger Dryas, the Earth's oceans began to rise. Fast. Not all at once, but in powerful bursts known today as meltwater pulses. These events pushed trillions of gallons of fresh water into the seas, lifted coastlines upward, and redrew the outlines of continents. Since the last glacial peak, sea levels have climbed over 100 meters, a rise so massive that it drowned more than just beaches. It swallowed entire land bridges, river deltas, and low-lying coastal plains. Continental shelves, which now sit underwater, were once dry and likely inhabited. These shelves extend like ghostlands from the edges of continents, broad and flat, with gentle slopes that would have been ideal for farming, fishing, and settlement. Yet now they are buried beneath silt and salt water, untouched by modern archaeology. Could a great capital have once stood on one of these shelves, near the edge where land gave way to sea? Today's fishing lines often drop into waters that were once dry ground. Ancient river mouths, once teeming with life and trade, are now drowned and hidden beneath modern bays and gulfs. We can still trace their paths on underwater maps, flowing like fossil veins across the sea floor. What cities might have stood at these mouths? Built where fresh water met salt, where harbors were naturally formed, and where trade routes converged. Some researchers have suggested that the remains of pre-Ice Age settlements could lie beneath the North Sea, in the lost world of Doggerland. Others point to similar drowned shelves in Southeast Asia and the Caribbean. But what about the Atlantic Ocean, the very zone where Plato placed Atlantis? There, the mid-Atlantic ridge and nearby continental edges offer wide, flat areas that were above water just 12,000 years ago. If Atlantis was real, could it have stood on one of these now submerged platforms? And if so, what clues could remain after so much time and pressure? Satellite mapping has revealed strange shapes on some of these seafloors, but mud and marine life blur the lines. Divers cannot easily reach such depths, and still, stories persist of stone walls and terraces seen below the waves. Without formal surveys, we can only wonder what sleeps beneath the silt. Are we looking at natural formations, or are they the last ruins of cities long erased? The lost edges of our continents may hold more history than we realize. For tens of thousands of years, humans lived by the sea. They built close to rivers and fertile coasts, not on high mountaintops. As the water rose, the memory of those places sank with it. Today, what was once land has become mystery, and in the gaps between known history and the sea's silent floor, the question waits. Did a real Atlantis vanish during one of these powerful pulses, drowned in a moment we cannot yet fully see? At the heart of the Younger Dryas mystery lies a question that continues to divide researchers. What caused the sudden return of Ice Age conditions and the violent warming that followed? Two main theories dominate the debate. One points to a cosmic impact, a comet or fragment striking Earth around 12,900 years ago. The other proposes a chain reaction inside Earth's own climate system, triggered by melting ice and shifting ocean currents. The impact theory is supported by strange markers in the soil. Across North America and parts of Europe, scientists have found a thin layer of black sediment known as the black mat. Within it lie microscopic spheres of melted rock, high levels of platinum, and even nanodiamonds, rare crystals that form under intense heat and pressure. These suggest a sudden, fiery event. Alongside them, Layers of charcoal hint at continent-wide wildfires that may have swept across dry grasslands and forests. Could a comet have exploded in the sky, igniting flames and turning the air to ash? On the other hand, some researchers argue for an internal trigger. As glaciers melted, giant freshwater lakes formed in the interior of North America. At some point, one or more of these lakes may have burst their icy barriers, spilling fresh water into the North Atlantic. This flood could have disrupted the ocean conveyor belt, which moves warm and cold water around the globe. With that system broken, the climate would have snapped back to cold until it reset itself. If either of these events occurred, the result would have been the same: massive climate disruption. The key question, however, is what either scenario would have done to low-lying civilizations. Would a comet strike have triggered tsunamis, shattered stone cities, or plunged settlements into years of darkness? Would shifting ocean currents have changed rainfall patterns, starved crops, and forced entire peoples to flee their coastal homes? Some theorists suggest both events may have happened together, in sequence or overlap. But no matter the cause, the impact on early human life would have been devastating. Floods, fires, and years of unstable weather could wipe out records, scatter populations, and erase cities from memory. If Atlantis was real and located near an ancient shoreline, then it would have been one of the first victims. Could a seafaring empire survive if the stars vanished behind smoke, the ports flooded, and farmland turned to mud? Are we searching for ruins in the wrong era, when the real fall happened thousands of years before known history began? The layers of Earth still hold the answer, whether from cosmic dust or lakebed silt. The challenge now is to keep asking, which disaster reshaped our world, and which cities did it erase? When the Ice Age ended and seas began to rise, the shape of the Earth's coastlines changed in ways that are hard to imagine today. Ancient maps, if they had existed, would have shown a very different world. Rivers ran longer courses, lakes sat deeper inland, and wide stretches of coastal land connected islands to mainlands. But as sea levels rose, slowly at first, and then with increasing speed, those old maps became useless. Bays deepened and spread, islands became smaller or disappeared. Peninsulas broke apart, cut by new straits and inlets. Entire lowlands vanished under waves, and with them, the harbors, towns, and ports that may have stood there were buried too. Modern science lets us trace these changes. By matching global sea level curves with regional maps of the continental shelf, researchers have redrawn the ancient world. These shelves, now underwater, once held fertile ground where early humans likely fished, farmed, and built their homes. If Atlantis stood on one of these edges, then it would now be more than 300 feet beneath the surface. Plato described a ringed city, surrounded by canals, with causeways that reached the sea. Structures like that would have been especially vulnerable. As the water rose floor by floor, each canal would have filled, each outer ring swallowed. Over time, silt from rivers and tides would cover the stone beneath, layering mud and debris until nothing remained visible. Could a city so carefully planned simply disappear into the sea without a trace? We know that in some parts of the world, like the Gulf of Kambat in India or the coast of Japan, underwater structures have been reported. Stone shapes that resemble walls or steps. Many are still debated, but they raise the same question: what lies hidden just offshore? Ancient ports were not built deep in the hills. They were built at the edge, where goods could move from land to sea. As the sea moved, those places became ruins, then memories, then myths. And while most modern cities grew up far from these early sites, we now have the tools to find them again. Side-scan sonar, sub-bottom profilers, and satellite bathymetry all help us look beneath the waves. But much of the seafloor remains unmapped. How many ringed structures might be buried beneath a meter of mud? How many drowned valleys might hold stone paths leading nowhere? Each new survey brings a chance to update the map, not just of our land, but of our past. What we think of as permanent is often temporary in Earth's timeline. What if Atlantis did exist, and its erasure was not by legend, but by the rising sea itself? To answer that, we must keep redrawing the map, shifting the borders back to where they once were, and asking what vanished when the coastlines moved. Plato's most detailed clue about Atlantis was its shape. In his dialogues, he described a city built in rings, alternating circles of land and water, protected by great walls, and crossed by causeways that connected the rings to one another and to the outer harbor. At the center stood a temple to Poseidon, gleaming with precious metals, and surrounded by lush gardens and palaces. The design was not random. It followed a precise plan, one meant for control, defense, and beauty. But has such a structure ever existed? Across the ancient world, no surviving city matches this layout exactly. Yet echoes of it appear in surprising places. Some harbor systems, like those in Carthage and parts of Crete, show circular design elements. The Punic port of Carthage, for instance, had a round inner harbor surrounded by docks and a central island, used for both trade and military purposes. Could this have been inspired by an older model? Perhaps one passed down in memory or myth. We turn to geomorphology, the natural shapes of Earth's surface, to look for patterns. On continental shelves and ancient lagoons, researchers have found circular and semicircular depressions, some formed by erosion, others by past water flow. Could any of these be remnants of a drowned city, or were they purely natural? In the Azores, sonar scans have picked up ring-like features on the seafloor, though their true nature remains uncertain. Ring cities are rare, but not impossible. The design itself offers clear benefits. It allows for defensive perimeters, centralized planning, and effective transportation using canals. Would early engineers, especially those who relied on water for travel and trade, have favored such a form? And if so, might they have copied a much older, now lost example? Some believe the ring layout wasn't just practical, but symbolic. Concentric circles often appear in spiritual or cosmic diagrams. Could Atlantis have served both as a city and a model of cosmic order? If survivors from a drowned city fled inland, would they have tried to recreate their capital's layout, or pass down the design through oral tradition and temple lore? As we study satellite maps and bathymetric scans, we continue to look for patterns that match Plato's account, not just in one place, but in many, as if a shared memory lived on. Could the ring city motif be the fingerprint of an ancient civilization that once existed on land, now lost beneath the sea? Or are we seeing shapes where there are none, chasing circles drawn only in myth? Either way, the question remains: if such a city once stood, why did so many ancient builders lean toward circular forms? And who, if anyone, first set those rings in stone? In the ancient world, long before books or printing presses, knowledge lived inside temples. These were not just places of worship, but centers of learning. Within their walls, priests and scribes worked to track the stars, predict the seasons, write the laws, and preserve the history of their people. Clay tablets, stone carvings, and scrolls recorded calendars, harvest cycles, and building techniques. These temple schools acted like early universities, passing knowledge from one generation to the next. But what happened when the waters rose and the coastlines shifted? If a great flood destroyed cities and scattered populations, could the survivors have carried this temple wisdom with them? Some researchers believe that's exactly what happened. As lowland settlements vanished, groups fled to higher ground, bringing with them not only memories, but the tools to rebuild. These weren't just farmers or laborers. They were engineers, astronomers, and lawgivers. The temples they built in new lands came fully formed, with complex layouts and rituals that suggest planning, not guessing. In places like Sumer, Egypt, and early Mesoamerica, we see the sudden rise of dynasties with advanced skills in agriculture, stonework, and navigation. Could that knowledge have come from earlier coastal civilizations now lost to the sea? If Atlantis was one of these lost centers, its fall might have forced its people to spread out and share what they knew. In this way, the story of Atlantis is not just about loss, but about legacy. Could this explain why the earliest city plans often align with the stars, or why ancient laws were written with such precision? How did farming methods appear so suddenly and so effectively across distant regions? If early teachers had survived the flood, would they not have shared their calendars, their building codes, and their star charts? In many cultures, priests were also timekeepers. They watched the sky and marked the solstices, vital for planting and harvest. They tracked Venus, the moon, and eclipses. This knowledge did not come from trial and error alone. It required long observation, often recorded across generations. If that knowledge was preserved by refugees, it would explain the head start some civilizations seem to have. Scribes in Sumer etched entire legal codes into stone. Egyptian priests described the motion of heavenly bodies with astonishing accuracy. The Maya carved star cycles into temple walls. These patterns suggest not invention, but preservation. Could all of this point back to a drowned source of knowledge? A city of priests, engineers, and scholars who fled rising seas and carried their tools with them? If so, the temples of the ancient world may not just be holy places, but archives of a forgotten age, an age that began at the edge of the ocean, and only survived because someone remembered what was written on the stones. All across the ancient world, from the highlands of Peru to the plains of Britain, there stand great stones that seem to serve no practical purpose, except to point at the sky. These megaliths, some weighing dozens of tons, were set in careful patterns. Many align with the rising or setting sun during solstices, or mark the movements of the moon and stars. Sites like Stonehenge in England, Nabta Playa in Egypt, and Chanquillo in Peru were not just ceremonial. They were observatories built in stone. Some date back over 5,000 years. But how did early cultures know where to place them, or how to align them so precisely with the heavens? In most cases, no written records remain. Yet the layouts are so exact, so consistent, that they seem to echo a deeper tradition. Could these builders have followed instructions passed down from an earlier age, perhaps one now lost beneath the sea? If a coastal civilization had mastered sky tracking before the Younger Dryas floods and passed its knowledge to survivors, then megalithic structures may be the last pages of a very old book. Stone does not rot or burn. It stands, and in standing, it remembers. Many ancient cultures believed the sky was sacred, and that time itself flowed from the stars. Their calendars were carved in stone, not written in ink. Why do so many megalithic sites appear suddenly, with little sign of slow development? Why do so many align with solstices, lunar cycles, or constellations important to navigation? It's as if the knowledge came all at once, planted, not grown. Some of the stones are placed with such accuracy that they rival modern instruments. At Nabta Playa, a stone circle in the Nubian desert predates Stonehenge and points directly to the summer solstice sunrise. At Chaco Canyon, Walls and windows track both solar and lunar events. The builders didn't guess. They measured. And yet, we have no clear evidence of who taught them. If the tradition came from a lost coastal culture, forced inland by rising seas, then these monuments could be silent markers of that migration. Imagine engineers and sky watchers arriving in new lands, carrying nothing but memory and stone tools. They build again, not cities, but calendars, and they teach the next generation where to look and when. In this way, stone becomes textbook. Each carved groove, each aligned doorway, a diagram of cycles that repeat forever. If Atlantis existed, and its people valued the stars, then these megaliths might reflect their knowledge, not in name, but in method. Are we looking at scattered echoes of a vanished world, preserved in stone by those who refuse to forget the sky? The stones still stand, facing the same stars they did thousands of years ago. They do not speak, but they point. The question is, where did their builders learn what to measure? Rising from the hills of southeastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe stands as one of the most mysterious monuments of the ancient world. Buried for thousands of years, it was only rediscovered in the late 20th century. Yet it has already challenged nearly everything we thought we knew about early civilization. Built just after the end of the Younger Dryas, around 11,600 years ago, this site features massive stone pillars arranged in circles, some weighing over 10 tons. They were carved, transported, and placed upright by people who, according to traditional history, were still hunters and gatherers. But the skill on display here says otherwise. The stones are covered with intricate carvings: foxes, vultures, lions, snakes, each etched with care and meaning. Some seem to depict constellations, others perhaps events lost to time. There are no signs of agriculture or permanent homes nearby. Yet the effort required to build Göbekli Tepe would have taken planning, labor coordination, and shared belief. Could this be the work of people carrying knowledge from an older world? A world erased by the sea and remembered in symbols rather than words? Some researchers believe Göbekli Tepe was more than a ritual site. It may have been a gathering point, a spiritual center where myths from lost cities were retold and preserved. The builders may have come from many places, bringing stories passed down from generations before. Was this hilltop sanctuary a lighthouse built at the edge of a new age, where memory stood watch over a world that had been swept away? Why else would nomadic people, still chasing game across the plains, stop to raise stone circles that tracked the heavens? Could they have been guided by elders who remembered a time when cities faced the sea and temples stood near drowned shores? The timing is precise. Göbekli Tepe rose soon after the Younger Dryas ended, during the same period when sea levels surged and lowland regions were vanishing. If survivors of those lost places moved inland, might they have chosen this hill as a new sacred ground? The precision of the site and its sudden appearance in the archaeological record suggest a knowledge base that didn't evolve slowly in place. It came from somewhere. Could Göbekli Tepe be one of the first places where that older knowledge was anchored again? Today, we cannot read the language of its stones. No texts were left behind, no tools that tell the full story. But the layout, the carvings, and the sheer size of the work speak clearly. This was not the beginning of something, but the continuation of something already known. In stone, the past tried to survive, and through those carvings, we may be looking at the echoes of a people who once lived by the sea before the water rose. Beneath the waves of the North Sea lies a forgotten world, Doggerland, a once thriving landmass that connected Britain to mainland Europe during the last ice age. This vast plain, now drowned, was rich with rivers, lakes, forests, and wildlife, It stretched from the coasts of what is now Denmark and the Netherlands to the chalk cliffs of eastern England. For thousands of years, humans lived there, hunting, gathering, and building temporary camps. Then the sea began to rise, slowly at first, then in violent pulses. As the Younger Dryas ended, and meltwater surged into the oceans, Doggerland shrank, islands formed, marshes took over. By around 8,000 years ago, most of it was gone, submerged under the sea where ships now pass without a trace of the world below. How do we know it existed? Trawlers fishing in the North Sea have pulled up bones of mammoths, reindeer, and even human tools, flint axes, carved antlers, and burned wood. Seafloor mapping has revealed ancient riverbeds, lake basins, and hilltops, all now underwater. Core samples have confirmed layers of soil and plant life buried beneath the seabed, preserved in cold darkness. Doggerland is one of the best examples we have of how rising seas can erase entire landscapes, and with them, everything humans may have built. Could cities have once stood here? Could early seafarers have launched from its shores? While no stone temples or walls have been found, the region's size and central location make it a strong candidate for early settlement. And if Doggerland held communities, even simple ones, then it shows us how much we may be missing elsewhere. Doggerland proves that whole chapters of human history may now lie beneath the sea. If this lost land can be mapped and studied, what about the wide continental shelves off the coasts of Iberia, Africa, or the Americas? Are they hiding ruins too? Ruins more advanced than we've yet imagined? What if Doggerland was not an isolated case, but part of a larger story? One where advanced coastal cultures fell silent under the waves. As we study Doggerland, we learn how to find other lost lands. We learn how river paths look on the seafloor, how organic layers signal human use, and how fishing boats can help us recover history one artifact at a time. In that sense, Doggerland is not just a drowned plane. It's a test case, a model that shows how powerful and fast the sea can reshape the world. And it reminds us to keep looking down, into the depths, where the past may still be sleeping. If Atlantis once stood on a similar plane, it would have vanished just as completely, leaving behind not temples in the desert, but scattered clues beneath the sea. Far out in the North Atlantic, a cluster of volcanic islands rises above the waves. The Azores, scattered across the ocean like stepping stones. They sit near the mid-Atlantic ridge, a vast undersea mountain range that divides tectonic plates. These islands are part of a region filled with seamounts, flat-topped plateaus, and deep underwater terraces. For some researchers, the Azores represent more than just a geological feature. They are a possible window into the past, a place where a lost civilization might have once stood before the seas rose. Could these islands be the surviving peaks of a once larger landmass? Could the flat terraces below the waterline have once been plains, ports, or harbors? Bathymetric maps reveal curious patterns on the seafloor. Shelves that step down like giant platforms, ridges that run in near straight lines, and undersea shapes that invite speculation. Some claim to see walls, roads, or even pyramid-like forms in sonar scans. Others argue these are natural formations, the product of volcanic activity and erosion. The debate is ongoing, but the location is compelling. Plato wrote that Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Heracles, in the Atlantic Ocean, on an island larger than Libya and Asia combined. He also described it as rich in minerals, ringed by canals, and ultimately destroyed by floods and earthquakes. The Azores region, known for both volcanic activity and seismic shifts, fits parts of that description. Could a large island or small continent have once stood near this area, later broken apart by tectonic movement and drowned by rising seas? If so, what would remain today? Could the ruins of harbors or buildings still sit on those stable platforms, buried beneath sediment and coral? Multi-beam sonar scans offer a way forward. These tools can create high-resolution images of the ocean floor, revealing features just meters across. Yet much of the Azores region remains unmapped at that level. The slopes and plateaus near the islands are particularly promising. These are areas where structures could have once stood above sea level, then sunk slowly, or all at once. Would we find right angles among the ridges, or circular harbor outlines hidden by time? Could canals be carved into now submerged rock, masked by marine growth but visible under the silt? The Azores window gives us a test zone, an ideal mix of legend, geology, and potential. But only deeper surveys will tell us what lies beneath. This is where science and myth meet. The data must guide the search. Yet the stories spark it. In this place where islands still breathe fire and the ocean runs deep, we may find clues to a world before the flood, a world that vanished not in fantasy, but in the rising tide. Just south of the Azores, another chain of islands draws our attention. The Canaries and Madeira, off the northwest coast of Africa. Like the Azores, these islands rise from the seafloor, along volcanic ridges, surrounded by wide shelves and underwater slopes. To some researchers, this area represents another vital piece of the lost world puzzle. These islands are situated near ocean currents and steady trade winds that, in ancient times, could have moved small vessels across vast distances with surprising ease. Could early seafarers have sailed from the shores of a now drowned city to these high islands? Could the Canaries and Madeira have served as waypoints between a coastal empire and the continents beyond? Paleo-shoreline reconstructions show that during the last ice age, the sea was over 100 meters lower. This means that the shelves around these islands would have been broader, flatter, and perhaps dry enough to hold settlements. But today, those same areas are deep underwater, covered in soft sediment and shaped by complex underwater forces. The region is known for landslides and shifting sands. Giant waves of silt, called sand waves, have swept across the seafloor here, hiding and erasing what might lie beneath. Massive landslides, some triggered by volcanic activity, have pushed entire sections of island slope into the abyss, leaving scars that stretch for miles. If stone walls or buildings once stood on these slopes, they could have been shattered or buried deep below thick layers of mud. Still, some underwater features remain unexplored. Multi-beam sonar scans have only recently begun to map the region in high detail. In a few places, unusual shapes have been found: ridges, terraces, and formations that resist easy explanation. Are these natural volcanic flows? Or is it possible they were once shaped by human hands? If a city once stood on the ancient shoreline, could its harbor still be detected, perhaps as a curve of submerged wall or a basin filled with unnatural stone? The position of these islands also makes them valuable for another reason. They sit in the path of the Atlantic's great trade winds, currents that would have allowed travel between Africa, Europe, and even the Americas. Could the Canary Current have once carried ships between a central capital and its outposts? If Atlantis had existed on a shelf nearby, this current would have been its main highway. Today, these islands offer not just beauty, but clues covered by silt, shaped by lava, and swept by ocean flow. As we scan these underwater zones and map the ancient shelves, we must ask, what lies beneath the waves off Africa's forgotten coastlines? And if we find something, a carved stone, a submerged dock, will it be enough to tell the story of a world that once was, before the sea rose and made islands of its mountains? Beneath the clear waters of the Caribbean, ancient landscapes lie hidden: broad, shallow banks in the Bahamas, deep coastal margins off Cuba, and long-forgotten channels etched into the seafloor. During the Ice Age, much of this region was dry land, rich in resources, and open for settlement. The Bahama Banks, in particular, form a wide, flat platform that would have stood above sea level when oceans were over 100 meters lower. Could this vast shelf have once supported an early civilization? Some claim yes. Over the years, divers and researchers have reported strange stone structures in these waters. Rectangular blocks, linear arrangements, and even what appear to be steps or paved surfaces. Near Bimini, in the Bahamas, one underwater site sparked decades of debate. Known as the Bimini Road, it consists of large, flat stones laid in a curved line, resting just a few meters below the surface. Some believe it to be the remains of an ancient harbor or road. Others argue it is a natural formation, beach rock broken and shaped by waves. Which is it? That remains unsettled. Off the coast of Cuba, reports emerged of sonar scans showing geometric shapes, grids, pyramidal forms, and what appeared to be urban-style layouts at depths too deep for scuba diving. These claims have yet to be confirmed by peer-reviewed studies. Still, they raise the question, could remnants of a city grid lie beneath the blue water, waiting to be found? To move beyond speculation, we need hard data. Clear underwater surveys using multi-beam sonar, followed by physical dives or robotic submersibles, could map the seafloor with precision. Core samples could test for cultural layers, ash, pottery, tools, or signs of quarrying. The Caribbean shelf is uniquely positioned. It lies close to major ocean currents and sits between the Americas and the Atlantic. If a maritime culture had once existed nearby, it would have used these waters to trade, migrate, and build. The geography is ideal for a seafaring people, but with sediment layers constantly shifting and marine growth covering the seabed, only careful study can separate myth from reality. Could the Caribbean be hiding traces of a sunken city? One that mirrors the stories passed down from Plato and other ancient sources? Or are we chasing shadows shaped by geology? Either way, the shelf holds secrets. Each stone, each sonar scan, brings us closer to the truth. To unlock the Caribbean shelf puzzle, we must test the claims with science, not just curiosity. The question is not whether Atlantis was here, but whether the ocean floor beneath these warm waters holds evidence of something once great and long forgotten. Rivers have always been lifelines for civilization. From the Nile to the Tigris, from the Yangtze to the Amazon, early cities were born where fresh water met the sea. These meeting points offered more than just water. They offered trade, transport, fertile soil, and access to the wider world. But during the massive sea level rise that followed the Ice Age, many of these ancient river mouths were overwhelmed. The places where cities once stood were drowned, their channels stretched and blurred by advancing tides. Today, scientists refer to these vanished zones as drowned river valleys. These are underwater channels, often deep and winding, that once carried fresh water to the sea. Now, they lie hidden beneath modern coastlines, covered by mud, sand, and centuries of shifting sediment. Using sonar and sediment cores, researchers have traced these ancient paths far beyond today's shorelines. They show where rivers once flowed freely over land that is now deep underwater. Could the remains of cities, built on these old banks, still lie there, buried beneath thick layers of marine silt? The possibility grows stronger with each survey. In many places, these drowned valleys lead to deltas or fans of fine mud, deposited slowly over time. If a city once sat at the mouth of one such river, its remains could now be hidden beneath dozens of feet of sediment. Structures made from stone might survive, but they would be invisible to basic sonar scans. Walls, roads, even canals could be buried so deeply that only core drilling would detect them. This poses a serious challenge for exploration. How do you search for a city you cannot see? What if Atlantis, or a similar coastal capital, was not destroyed in a single cataclysm, but slowly erased, one layer of silt at a time? Many of the largest river systems on Earth flow into continental shelves that were dry land just 12,000 years ago. From the Mississippi to the Ganges, from the Nile to the Amazon, these rivers offer potential hiding places for lost cities. Even smaller rivers that no longer exist above ground may have once supported early settlements near their ancient mouths. If these cities had canals, as Plato described, then they would have been especially vulnerable to rising seas and shifting sediment. And if they served as centers of trade, with docks and marketplaces, their remains could still sit under soft mud waiting to be found. Could new technology, deep penetrating radar, advanced sonar, or fine-resolution core sampling finally bring these sites into view? As we map more of these drowned river paths, we're learning how much land has been lost and how much history may still lie beneath. If the story of Atlantis began at a river's mouth, it may have ended under a smooth, silent fan of mud, one we have yet to disturb. Long before the formal rise of the Bronze Age, metals were already moving across vast distances. Ancient copper and tin, vital for making bronze, left chemical fingerprints that still echo in artifacts today. From the Alps to Anatolia, from Wales to the Sinai, scattered traces point to active mines in the deep past. Some of these sites are thousands of years older than known empires. Using isotope analysis, scientists have tracked the signatures of metal from distant sources. Copper from Spain appears in artifacts in the eastern Mediterranean. Tin from Cornwall may have reached shores as far as the Levant. These patterns suggest something remarkable: a network. Could there have been an organized sea-based trade long before recorded maritime states? The idea leads back to Plato's tale. He described a mighty naval power that once ruled the seas, rich in resources and linked to distant lands. If such an empire existed, metals would have been its arteries, flowing in and out from its ports. Many of the ancient mines show signs of early activity that sharply declined or stopped around the time seas began to rise. Could these breaks mark the drowning of trade centers? Or were the traders themselves swallowed by shifting coastlines? Some researchers propose the existence of lost metallurgists, skilled groups who moved from mine to mine, spreading tools, knowledge, and trade. These experts could have been part of a broader culture whose coastal hubs now sit beneath the waves. Is it possible that Atlantis, or a civilization like it, once controlled these metal flows? Would a capital rich in gold, copper, and tin have stood at a harbor now lost? We often view Bronze Age trade as beginning around the 3rd millennium BCE, but the evidence for earlier roots is growing. Obsidian, a volcanic glass used in tools, moved hundreds of kilometers in the Mesolithic, long before cities. If stone could travel that far, why not metal? Who were the early navigators who understood these routes, these hidden winds, and shifting currents? The clues point back to the continental shelves. If a sea power once dominated these waters, its ships may have touched the shores of Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Its ports could now lie beneath silt and coral. What if gold caches and ore ingots are waiting on drowned seabeds, misread as natural debris? Satellite imaging, sonar mapping, and undersea cores are beginning to peel back the ocean's veil. What will we find in the sandbanks, the submerged valleys, the silent trenches? If there was once a lost coast that managed metals across continents, Its remains may still speak through the isotopes in an axe head, or the smelted lumps found in an ancient wreck. The question that lingers is not whether early trade existed, it's who ran it, and what coast did they call home. In the stories passed down from Plato, there was a metal said to shine like fire and rival gold in worth. The name was orichalcum, a red gold alloy said to cover the walls, roofs, and even the sacred temple of Atlantis. For centuries, scholars debated whether this was pure legend or a forgotten reality. In our search, we examined orichalcum through a metallurgist's lens. Some linked it to brass, a mix of copper and zinc, which would indeed shine reddish gold under light. Others proposed it was a rare copper alloy with iron, nickel, or even arsenic. Ancient sources from Greece and Rome sometimes treated orichalcum as real, yet mysterious. The Romans even minted coins said to be made of it. Could it be that orichalcum was a brand, a signature blend, of a great coastal power? If so, the metal itself might be the clue to its makers. We studied slag heaps and metallurgical remains along drowned shores. Unique mixtures, when cooled, leave fingerprints. Could a distinct alloy recipe, lost in the flood, still linger in sediments off the coasts of Spain, Africa, or the Caribbean? We reviewed the 2015 discovery off Sicily's coast, where dozens of reddish ingots were found near an ancient shipwreck. Tests showed high levels of copper, zinc, and traces of lead, close to modern brass, but with an ancient twist. Was this trade cargo, or tribute from a lost alloy tradition? We dug deeper into ancient smelting. Could certain volcano-rich islands have offered the ideal mix of ores, places where iron-rich sands and copper veins met at ancient forges? Would the process of combining these metals have been seen as sacred? In some cultures, metalwork was reserved for priests or elites, the flames guarded by ritual. If Atlantis had such a signature alloy, perhaps it marked not just wealth, but identity. A shield, a pendant, a tablet, cast in orichalcum, could have been a national seal. Do any museum pieces today carry this secret signature, misfiled as common bronze or tarnished brass? Some legends said the metal could only be worked by those with lost knowledge. Were these coded memories of a technique erased in the floods, or just myths growing on the ruins of real craft? We also considered the absence of orichalcum. If it was common in Atlantis, why don't we see more of it? Could its production sites lie under the sea, buried by silt and time? We asked whether advanced scanning and underwater core samples might one day reveal strange slag or lost ingots shaped by unknown hands. If a red gold alloy shines from the seafloor, made by a method not used since the Ice Age ended, would we know it when we saw it? Could orichalcum be the missing name behind the shine of a world forgotten? The question hangs like the metal itself, somewhere between myth and memory. Ancient harbors didn't vanish without a trace. Even when cities fell, ports often left behind stone outlines, anchor grooves, or carved slips along old shorelines. In this chapter, we turn to the built waterworks of the ancient world. From Alexandria's Heptastadion to the sunken piers of Thonis Heraklion, the evidence showed how civilizations shaped their coasts. We explained how locks, breakwaters, and canal systems functioned, not just as transport hubs, but as symbols of power. These works were massive, layered with stone, and often reinforced with wood pilings. Over time, the sea may bury, but rarely erases such infrastructure. Divers have found stone rings and quays deep beneath modern waterlines. Underwater archaeology today uses sonar to map the seafloor in sharp detail. Right angles and regular spacing are the key signs to watch. Nature doesn't often make 90-degree lines. When we see long, straight stretches or square basins carved into the seabed, questions rise. Were these ports, reservoirs, defensive docks? We explained how tidal scouring and sediment drift can both reveal and hide these patterns. A well-preserved harbor might rest under just a meter of mud, invisible to the eye, but not to radar and magnetometers. We asked if an ancient ringed capital, like the one Plato described, might leave behind traces of concentric canals, lines so large they're only visible through multibeam scans. We advised that teams should focus near river deltas and old coastal shelves, where harbor systems once sat at the edge of the tide. Ancient locks, made to raise or lower boats, could leave grooves, wooden gates, or even sunken channels between basin levels. We referenced the lock systems in Mesopotamia and the Nile, where city engineers moved boats with clever systems of pressure and height. If a lost city used similar tools, they might still rest under silt, their outlines preserved, like scars in the stone. We also looked at how cities protected these harbors. Moles, long stone arms, blocked waves. Sea gates stood at entries to manage ship flow. Could any such walls, now toppled, lie in pieces across the shelf floor? We invited the question. If a diver found long, flat stones forming a circle under the sand, what story might it tell? Could old maps or harbor plans match formations found off the Azores or the coast of West Africa? We reviewed satellite images showing submerged shapes that were dismissed as natural. Yet how many of those dismissed lines curved just enough to hint at design? Could ancient engineering be hiding in plain sight beneath centuries of tide and disbelief? The harbor was the heart of any coastal power. If Atlantis ever lived, its sea gates, locks, and ringed canals must have touched the sea. And if they touched the sea, then the sea may still remember where. Along the edges of plates, where Earth's crust bends and slips, ancient cities faced dangers that struck without warning. In this chapter, we explored the destructive power of earthquakes and the tsunamis they trigger. The Mediterranean basin, the Caribbean arc, and the mid-Atlantic ridge are riddled with faults. We showed how a single quake could tilt a coastline or drop a harbor into the sea. Such shifts leave clues: seabed cracks, turbidite layers, and buried soil horizons sealed under new deposits. Plato's account of a sudden end, a day and night of catastrophe, echoed this very kind of event. We highlighted examples like Helike in Greece, a city swallowed by the sea after a quake. We looked at modern seismology tools that scan the ocean floor and detect old fault scarps and quake-buried ruins. Core samples pulled from seabeds sometimes show quick shifts, dark bands of storm sand, sudden mudslides, and chaotic mixtures that hint at violent waters. We also examined tsunami deposits, found inland and offshore, packed with marine shells and debris. These were fingerprints of waves that once rolled far past normal shores. Some layers dated to around the Younger Dryas end. We considered whether a great city might have endured sea rise for centuries, only to fall when one last quake or wave hit. Could a capital once floating on canals be torn apart as the ground cracked beneath it? Would its stones sink, scatter, or vanish under new sediment? We raised the theory that sea rise weakened lowland soils. Quakes striking saturated land often trigger liquefaction, where the ground behaves like water. Buildings tilt, roads split, and canals fail. Could this explain the legend of Atlantis sinking in a single day? If its foundations rested on soft marine clays, already soaked by a warming world, the final shock may not have needed to be massive. We drew comparisons to ancient cities in Japan and South America, where entire districts dropped below tide level after tremors. We also touched on the scars of ancient landslides near island slopes. Unstable terrain made worse by rising seas and tremors. These events sometimes launched localized tsunamis strong enough to erase coast towns. We asked the key question: was the last blow to a great sea city geological, not mythical? The temple records in Egypt described a fall, not just a flood. Our goal was to show that nature provides the tools: earthquakes, sea rise, and time. The memory of a vanished land might not be fantasy, but a fragment of tectonic truth. In the return to the impact theory, we followed strange evidence frozen in time. From North America to parts of Europe and the Middle East, geologists uncovered black mats, layers rich in soot, melted glass, and tiny metal spheres called microspherules. These signs often dated to the end of the Younger Dryas. Some matched sudden climate changes and animal extinctions. We described how a comet or asteroid breaking apart in the sky could cause an airburst, igniting vast fires across forests and grasslands. Such a blast would not leave a crater, but it would shower the land with molten debris and set the world ablaze. Fires of that scale would fill the skies with smoke and ash. We asked what would happen next. Could the smoke cool the earth for months, only to be followed by a burst of warming once greenhouse gases from the fires took hold? Was this sudden switch the trigger that ended the long, cold snap? If so, the consequences for coastlines would be severe. Ice sheets, already melting slowly, could crash into fast retreat. Glacial lakes might burst, and rivers would change direction. We looked at charcoal layers in lake beds, showing a time of wildfires and sudden flood. Then we zoomed out to ask, if sea levels rose rapidly after the burn, how far inland did the ocean reach? We followed the trail of burn scars and flood deposits. If one event lit the skies and shifted climate gears, then low cities near river mouths had no chance. Their harbors, markets, and shrines would vanish. Some say these signs support a global disaster that only a few survived, but others say the evidence fits smaller, scattered events. We raise the theory that even a minor object, entering at the right angle, could cause continent-scale chaos. Did a cluster of airbursts push Earth's systems over the edge, or were internal patterns already near collapse? We mapped the spread of impact proxies, nanodiamonds, high-temperature minerals, and rare elements, and saw they formed a web of destruction that spanned thousands of kilometers. Whether the cause was from above or within, the effect was the same: flooding, fire, and famine. We returned to the idea that these shifts left stories behind. Did the ancient tales of burning skies and drowning lands begin here? Could the priest's memory of floods be the aftershock of a world that burned before it sank? We asked how many coasts today hold secrets under layers of ash and clay, their stones waiting for a scan or core to bring them back into the light. As the Younger Dryas came to a sudden end, the great beasts that once roamed in herds across vast plains began to disappear. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats all faded from the record in a blink of geologic time. We examined extinction layers across the Americas, Europe, and Asia, and found the same story written in bones and soil. Sudden climate swings and vanishing food sources played a role. But we asked, did people play a part too? As the coasts drowned and cities slipped under rising seas, survivors would have moved inland, following rivers and game. Stress pushed both prey and predator into tighter zones. Hunting intensified. Fire followed as forests were cleared for safety, warmth, and fields. We described how charred layers often sit above megafauna remains, suggesting not just natural burn, but human hands. Were these burned plains signs of refugee groups trying to control their new wild homes? If so, the scale of fire marks a desperate push for survival. Inland valleys and plateaus swelled with wandering families who once lived near the sea. We asked how many groups met here for the first time, forced together not by trade, but by flood and famine. Some may have brought stories, calendars, and tools saved from the old coastal towns. Others brought only memory and myth. These crowding inland zones may be where old knowledge mixed and gave birth to new beginnings. But we also raise the theory that these crowdings stressed the land. Could the sudden rise of hunters have broken the balance, leading to the quick fall of the last great animals? We considered whether the extinction waves matched known migration paths. We also showed maps of old lake basins that became choke points for survival. In many cases, the megafauna vanished just before or just after the end of the Cold Age. This strange timing suggests more than just weather. We asked if the loss of these giants was a symbol of a deeper rupture in the natural world, one caused by both Earth's shifting climate and human upheaval. If refugees from the coast set fire to the lands, changed hunting patterns, and strained ecosystems, then perhaps the end of the mammoth also marked the end of an era. An age of great movement had begun. Inland, in caves and cliffs, stories were etched into stone, some of men chasing giants, some of beasts falling into pits. Were these more than just hunts? Were they the last memories of animals from a drowned world? And if so, did the stories of the beasts vanish just as fast as the animals themselves? We asked how many of today's inland myths are echoes of this crowded time, when memory, fear, and fire shaped a new map for a post-flood world. As sea levels climbed and coastlines vanished, the people who once lived along the edges of the world began to move. We tracked genetic signals across continents, finding strange breaks and narrow funnels in human diversity that suggest sudden shifts. These bottlenecks appeared near the end of the Younger Dryas, hinting at a time when once thriving groups shrank or fled. We followed DNA lineages that stretched from drowned shores to distant highlands. And we asked, could the seafarers of a lost age have become the inland builders of the next? If great sea towns slipped beneath the waves, their survivors would have climbed rivers, settled valleys, and remade themselves as farmers, miners, or masons. Their names may have changed, but the skills remained. We searched ancient languages for clues. In some of the oldest root words, we found terms for boats, oars, and sails, embedded deep in tongues far from the sea. We asked if these were hand-me-downs from coastal refugees. If so, then the memory of the sea lived on in inland speech, passed from parent to child, long after the waters closed over their harbors. We saw patterns in settlement that hinted at a hidden cause. Sudden towns in places once wild, tools more advanced than expected, new farming methods in lands never tilled before. Did these starts come from scratch, or did they carry something older? We avoided chasing names, because names fade fast. But skills, when seen across time, leave a clearer line. Masonry, sailing, metalwork, and mapping. They bloom like flowers after fire, often too suddenly to seem natural. We asked, did waves scatter teachers as well as tales? Were the first builders in river valleys really just the last survivors of cities lost to the sea? We showed how some myths tell of founders arriving by boat, bringing knowledge to the landlocked. Could this be history wrapped in story? The spread of people in this age was not random. River systems became highways, mountain passes became frontiers, and everywhere, we saw that where skills went, stories followed. We matched this movement to maps of climate stress, showing how each pulse of warming drove more people inland. Some clung to the old ways, others adapted. We looked again at the rise of highland cultures with strong navigation myths, and wondered, did they once sail across wide water before settling among peaks and valleys? These were not just migrants, they were the memory keepers of a sunken world. Their trails may be faint, but their impact shaped the next phase of human history. And so we asked, if their cities fell, how much of their world lives on in ours, hidden not in ruins, but in skills we still use, in maps we still follow? and in the quiet words we still speak about boats, stars, and the rise of water. After the sea reclaimed the coasts and the sky filled with ash and dust, survival depended not just on shelter or food, but on time. The people who moved inland faced a new rhythm, and to follow it, they needed calendars. We traced some of the oldest sky lists and solar counts, etched into stone and bone, painted onto cave ceilings, and carved into monuments. These early calendars were not mere marks, they were lifelines. A missed season could mean famine. Knowing when to plant, when to gather, and when the floods might return, could mean the difference between thriving or vanishing. We looked at ancient temples aligned with solstices, their dark chambers lit by the rising sun only on a single morning each year. These were not coincidences, they were sky clocks. We asked, who taught such precision? Could the most advanced calendars have come from people who once lived by the sea, watching stars rise over flat horizons? On coasts, the sky meets the ocean in a clean line, perfect for tracking stellar movement. We proposed that long before the inland temples, there were observatories beside harbors, where priests tracked the stars reflected in calm water. When those cities fell, the watchers fled, carrying sky lore with them. And in the New Highlands, they taught others how to mark time. In this way, memory survived. We showed how early calendars often began with the heliacal rising of a bright star, like Sirius, which heralded floods or seasons. This was knowledge refined over centuries, maybe millennia. We asked, did refugees bring these patterns inland like fire from a fading flame? We studied stone circles, pillar sites, and chambered tombs, all tied to light. Some tracked moon cycles, others, the sun's path. These weren't isolated inventions. They felt like echoes of a once unified method. Could this be the shared legacy of a fallen maritime world? A calendar is not just a way to count days. It is a system that links people to the land and sky, and in moments of great change, it becomes the backbone of civilization. We showed how farming depended on knowing when frosts end, how rivers behave, how birds migrate, all of it tied to the sun and stars. We argued that the strongest calendars may have roots deeper than we assume, that long before written history, there were astronomer priests standing on docks, taking notes on the sky. When their world crumbled, their notes became sacred, passed on, guarded, and etched into new stone, far from the sea. We ended by asking, if we now see temples pointing to the heavens, do we also see shadows of lost coastlines in their angles? Could these alignments be clues, pointing not just to solstices, but to where the watchers once stood, on shores now buried under blue? In the old Sumerian tablets, there is a curious phrase that echoes like a whisper from the sea. Kingship was lowered from heaven. At first glance, it speaks of divine right, of gods appointing rulers. But we paused and read deeper. What if heaven meant not the stars above, but the sacred sea, the lost place of origin? We proposed that kingship may have arrived by boat, not lightning. We followed this trail into river valleys, where early crowns appeared with no slow rise. In Egypt, in Mesopotamia, and along the Indus, we found thrones that seemed to start all at once, with law codes, irrigation, and ceremony already in place. We looked for signs that ruling elites came not from within, but from outside. We studied symbols on early seals and standards. Some wore boat motifs, others bore signs of the sea, shells, and waves etched in stone. These weren't land empires slowly blooming from village roots. They looked like sudden grafts. We asked if there was once a coastal court, an old capital, now lost beneath the tides, whose surviving leaders moved inland after the flood. Trained administrators, priests and engineers, could have carried order into chaos. We mapped how early dynasties rose near river mouths, as if waiting for new masters to arrive. In Sumer, the first kings appeared at Eridu and Ur, close to the ancient shoreline. In Egypt, Narmer united the upper and lower lands with symbols of dual rule, as though resolving two stories into one. Was this echo of an older pattern? Could the unifiers have been survivors? We showed how early texts speak of sacred boats bringing wisdom, grain, and rights. Some gods themselves arrived by sea. We treated these as cultural memory. A drowned city does not only vanish in stone, it vanishes in ritual, too, and its stories get woven into the myths of those who remain. We asked if these myths remember a royal court that once ruled from the sea, then sent envoys inland to rebuild what the waters took. We examined tombs where rulers were buried with shells from distant shores, with carvings of waves and birds not found nearby. These weren't decorative, they were identity. We considered that the idea of kingship itself may be a memory of order after collapse. That when people looked to the sea, they remembered not gods, but mariners who brought light in the dark. We linked this to sudden advances in law, weights, and building design, features that appear together like a package. Could this have come from a lost center, drowned but not forgotten? We ended by asking, if the first crowns followed the rivers back from the sea, then where did the boats begin their journey? And if kingship was lowered from heaven, was the heaven they meant once real, blue, and very near? The great Sphinx of Giza, carved from limestone and crouched beside the pyramids, holds more than the face of a pharaoh. It holds a riddle, carved by weather itself. In this chapter, we approached one of Egypt's oldest puzzles, the erosion that scarred the Sphinx. We presented both sides of the long debate. One side argued wind and sand shaped its body over time, fitting its conventional age of about 4,500 years. But another side, led by geologists and independent researchers, pointed instead to deep vertical weathering, the kind caused by heavy rainfall, not desert winds. The problem is, Egypt hasn't seen strong and steady rains since the end of the last ice age. That kind of wet period ended around 11,700 years ago, right at the close of the Younger Dryas. We mapped the climate data, rainfall patterns, Nile flood records, and cave formations in North Africa that confirm wetter conditions before 9000 BCE. If the Sphinx's damage came from those rains, the statue might be thousands of years older than the pharaohs themselves. That idea shakes the timeline of Egypt, but we stayed cautious. We showed the counter-arguments, that builders reused old pits, or that limestone layers erode unevenly. Yet the shape of the weathering, deep troughs and rounded grooves, still looked more like it came from falling rain than from blowing grit. We then asked the deeper question. If the Sphinx was carved in the time of rains, who carved it? Egypt's first known dynasties had no records of building it. The Sphinx was already there when their scribes began to write. We examined the Sphinx's face and proportions. Some scholars argued its head is too small for the body, suggesting it was recut from an older statue. If so, what was it before? A lion, a symbol older than writing. We reviewed temple blocks found around the Sphinx and dated their styles. Some matched dynastic Egypt, others looked cruder, perhaps from an earlier hand. We explained that there are no inscriptions from the original carving, no king's name, no clear dedication. This silence hinted at a time before formal writing. We asked, could a group from the lost coasts, fleeing floods and quakes, have left a mark here in stone? The body of the Sphinx may be weathered by rain, but its meaning may be washed in memory. We studied regional myths that spoke of a lion at the gates, a watcher of time. We showed how constellations like Leo rose in key positions at the end of the Younger Dryas. We noted that some early temples aligned with the Sphinx's gaze, pointing east to the sun's rebirth. Was this lion a relic of a time when survivors came inland, bringing with them sky lore and stonecraft? We ended the chapter asking not only when the Sphinx was made, but what kind of world its builders once knew, one shaped by rains, rivers, and a coast that's now lost beneath the sea. Beneath the blue surface lies a history written in sand, stone, and silt. In this chapter, we explained the tools used to read the seafloor, each one offering a different kind of vision. Multi-beam sonar maps the depth, revealing terrain like underwater mountains and plateaus. Side-scan sonar scans the surface textures, picking out strange angles, long lines, and debris fields. Sub-bottom profilers peer beneath the sediment, exposing hidden layers and buried structures. And remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, bring back close-up images and samples. Together, these tools have changed the search for lost lands. But we urged caution. The sea plays tricks. Sand ripples can form misleading patterns. Rock fractures may mimic man-made cuts. Even straight lines, often seen as signs of design, can form through natural processes. We listed what counts as solid evidence: right angles, consistent spacing, construction materials, tool marks, and planned layouts. We showed examples from known harbors and ports that were confirmed by cores and dives. These give us a baseline for comparison. We warned against jumping to conclusions from a single scan and instead pushed for method and patience. Patterns only become meaningful with context, repeat scans, and physical samples. Still, the possibilities are real. We highlighted underwater anomalies that fit the scale and layout of ancient waterworks: quays, channels, concentric walls. We pointed to regions where old river mouths meet now submerged valleys, places where civilizations might once have thrived. We emphasized the shelves, the gently sloping edges of continents that were dry land just 12,000 years ago. These are where ancient ports could wait, buried under sand and time. We set targets in these zones, especially where ancient myth and sea level curves overlap. Where Plato's clues meet paleogeography, we urged modern mapping missions. We asked, what might we find if we scanned every mile of shelf from the Azores to the Caribbean? What would it mean to find a canal, buried and forgotten, with stones still set in a curve? We cited projects that used sonar to find ancient coastlines, shipwrecks, and submerged towns. From the Black Sea to the Indian Shelf, technology has rewritten what we thought lost. We proposed a similar effort for the Atlantic Rim, guided by both myth and science. We noted that satellite-based bathymetry gives only a rough sketch, and that true resolution comes only from detailed, ship-based surveys. We called for international cooperation, funding, and open data sharing. Each dive, each scan, adds a piece to the puzzle. Finally, we reminded the viewer that the ocean has its own language, one that requires patience to hear. But it speaks. In walls half buried, in harbors now quiet, in stone lines that once held ships. Reading the seafloor is reading the last pages of a book nearly erased. And yet, page by page, the past begins to surface. Chapter 30. Cores that keep secrets. Beneath the ocean floor, time waits in quiet layers. In this chapter, we turn to sediment cores, slender columns extracted from the seabed that hold a layered record of the Earth's memory. These vertical samples act like pages in a forgotten journal, each slice revealing grain by grain what the world was like when that layer settled. We began by explaining how grain size tells a story. Fine silts often mean calm, sheltered waters, while coarser grains point to waves, storms, or sudden floods. In ancient harbors, centuries of human use can stir the sediment, leaving behind a silty signature, speckled with charcoal, shell fragments, and even bits of organic waste. We described how changes in pollen grains locked within the core can show when a landscape went from forested to flooded, or when crops replaced wild flora, hinting at habitation. Shells, too, fossilized in place, speak of past salinity and water temperature, marking the moment when a freshwater delta gave way to the sea. We showed how layers of volcanic ash offer time-stamped fingerprints, dated to known eruptions, anchoring the story with fixed points in time. We referenced past core studies from the North Sea's Doggerland and the Black Sea's sudden flooding, where sudden changes in sediment told of plains swallowed by rising tides. We noted how even traces of soot and microscopic glass can whisper of distant fires or ancient impacts, linking cores to larger stories told by stars and stone. We explained that where bathymetric scans show ring-like features or drowned river mouths, cores taken nearby could confirm if those formations once stood above water, shaped by human hands. If a concentric depression on the shelf near the Azores held a thick, undisturbed band of silt, rich in charcoal, pollen, and broken shell, then sharply shifted to clean marine sand, it might mark a harbor that worked for centuries before vanishing in one event. We asked what such a core would mean. What story would it confirm that no scroll or ruin could? We connected these physical samples back to the broader search. A sonar map can suggest a structure, but only a core reveals the human presence, the rhythms of use, and the moment of loss. We showed how radiocarbon dating on organic fragments anchors the timeline, and how isotopic analysis of shell and sediment layers tracks climate shifts in step with sea rise. We emphasized that sediment cores reach deep into the Younger Dryas and beyond, offering a long view of what stood before and after the Great Melt. We asked if somewhere beneath a shelf edge or ancient river fan lies a silted record of Atlantis, not in gold or grand ruins, but in mud, pollen, and layered silence. And we ended by reminding that while legend speaks in loud words, the seabed speaks in whispers, and it may be that the most honest memory of a drowned world is hidden not in stone, but in soft earth, waiting for the right question and the right drill. Across the U.S. coastal plain, especially from Delaware to Georgia, lie thousands of strange oval depressions, shallow basins filled with sand, water, or marsh, often aligned in a northwest-southeast direction. In this chapter, we turned our focus to the Carolina Bays. We opened with a description of their sheer number and strange uniformity, over 500,000 of them, scattered across the flat Atlantic coast, visible from aerial surveys and satellite images like fingerprints pressed into the earth. Their shapes are unmistakably elliptical, rimmed in many cases by a raised sandy ridge, as if formed by a sudden force or sweeping flow. We then presented the major theories behind their formation. One side links them to an impact event, possibly related to the Younger Dryas comet hypothesis. According to this view, the bays are secondary scars from ice or ejecta, striking the ground at shallow angles, melting permafrost, or gouging the earth in blast waves. Supporters point to the bay's common orientation and overlapping age windows, suggesting a sudden regional disturbance, not a slow, random formation. On the other hand, the mainstream geologic view favors a gradual process. Wind and water shaping shallow ponds in wet, sandy terrain over time. This windwave theory points to how water-laden soils, freeze-thaw cycles, and strong prevailing winds could sculpt consistent patterns over thousands of years. We stayed neutral, not to dismiss either case, but to highlight how such formations reflect powerful environmental forces, whether sudden or slow, capable of transforming entire coastlines. Our interest wasn't in solving the bay mystery outright, but in tracing what they might say about human habitability and memory. If the impact-linked theory holds even partial truth, then the bays may point to an event that shook the region just as people were settling post-Ice Age plains. If shaped by water and wind, their presence still speaks to vulnerable landscapes where rivers, estuaries, and camps once met. We explored archaeological digs near some of the bays, where tools, charcoal, and animal remains hint at ancient use, suggesting these ovals were not just natural curiosities but part of human space. We noted that several bays are near former coastlines or drowned river paths, locations where early sea peoples might have settled before rising seas pushed them inland. We asked how such sweeping features, aligned and clustered, might reflect the same kind of shock that Plato described: floods, fire, and vanished lands. We considered whether these basins became part of a cultural memory, perhaps influencing early myths of flood and fire passed down through generations. And we asked, most importantly, if similar oval features might lie offshore, buried under silt or missed by bathymetric surveys. Could a sea level rise erase not just a city, but its very footprint, leaving only subtle landforms behind? We closed by proposing that the Carolina Bays remain not just a geologic puzzle but a trail left by forces large enough to break coastlines, displace people, and reshape the memory of a continent. Whether born of wind or fire, their presence marks a chapter in the Earth's story where sudden change became permanent. Tiny diamonds locked inside dark soil layers mark one of the most dramatic turning points in Earth's recent past. Found in sediments dated to roughly 12,800 years ago, these nanodiamonds form only under extreme pressure and heat, the kind created by cosmic impacts or massive atmospheric explosions. Alongside them lies a dense mix of soot, microspherules, and platinum spikes, a chemical fingerprint of skies filled with fire. This combination suggests a world shaken by violent airbursts or widespread wildfires at the dawn of the Younger Dryas. Such events would have blackened the sky, plunging regions into short-lived cold, while releasing greenhouse gases that later drove abrupt warming. The chain of smoke, freeze, and rapid melt would have strained every community on Earth, but especially those built on low coasts. Fishing grounds would collapse, crops and shellfish beds would vanish, and storms would batter fragile harbors, already weakened by rising seas. These microscopic clues match myths of fire from above, scorched lands, and waves of punishment described in distant cultures. Black mats, dark layers rich in carbon, appear in multiple archaeological sites, just as large animals vanish and human traces thin. They are burn scars in the geological record, sealed beneath centuries of quiet deposition. If maritime towns once flourished along the edges of now drowned continents, these layers show the scale of the crisis they faced. People would have fled inland under a sky that rained ash, carrying only fragments of their knowledge. The sudden loss of seafood, salt, and coastal farmlands would have forced whole populations into rivers and highlands, reshaping languages, rituals, and trade. Even without a single crater to prove a strike, the evidence of intense heating and continent-scale fires is undeniable. It is a record of stress, etched not on tablets, but in soil. This microscopic story sets the stakes for a very human drama, a moment when nature erased entire lifeways in the space of a few generations. If a seafaring society did exist before the Younger Dryas, then these same nanodiamonds and soot may mark the day its world began to end. Beneath offshore sediments, cores may hold the same chemical signals, hidden alongside pollen and silt from drowned harbors. Such a discovery would not just support a theory, It would give a voice to those who watched their skies burn and their coasts vanish. The question is no longer whether Earth can deliver such shocks, but how many times it already has, and how much of our earliest history lies buried under ash, mud, and water waiting to be read. As the seas crept upward and coasts turned to silt, the highlands became a sanctuary for those who fled the rising tides. Across mountain valleys and ridges, early signs of new life took root. Villages perched on benches above floodlines, close to springs that never ran dry even through the worst droughts. These settlements show an unhurried but deliberate design. Terraces carved into slopes, stone paths linking storage pits, and fields laid out to trap the sun, slow the wind, and hold the rain. Where once coastal cities may have thrived on trade and tides, these upland communities rewrote their survival scripts around stability, permanence, and control over nature. In the archaeological record, the sudden spread of terrace agriculture marks more than a farming technique. It speaks to memory, to caution, to people who had seen land swallowed by the sea and would not risk it again. Springs were guarded like treasure, and hillsides became layered with effort. The spacing of homes, the careful orientation of stones, and the rebuilding of calendars suggest not a culture born from scratch but an older one adapting. Some sites show signs of inherited skill. Fine masonry without mortar, star-shaped alignments in stone rings, and pathways that echo ancient units of measurement. These upland havens may have begun as refugee camps, but they matured into planned societies, with customs and laws shaped by loss. Oral traditions from such regions often speak of floods long past, of ancestors who walked inland with fire, tools, and stories, carrying fragments of their drowned world. As water levels rose and coastal plains vanished, these mountain cradles became nodes of continuity. The need to defend against the cold, to predict seasons without a clear ocean horizon, and to ration food through long winters sharpened their thinking and shaped their choices. This shift away from abundance toward restraint can be read in their priorities: granaries before temples, terraces before towers, rules before glory. They were rebuilding not just homes, but ideas. They understood that the world below had once been full and thriving, and they feared the sea would someday rise again. It is here, above the line where the tides once surged, that we may find the blueprint of a second world, a memory of the first carved into stone, adapted to survive where no wave could ever reach. The highlands, then, were not merely a safe place. They were the rebirth chambers of a civilization that refused to drown, that remembered, and that reshaped itself for what came next. Across scattered myths and carved stones, there lingers the quiet shape of a voyage not of conquest, but of remembrance. In the wake of drowned coasts and vanished cities, it is said that ships set sail not to rule but to teach. These were not fleets of war, but vessels of memory, carriers of calendars, laws, and sky lore passed down through generations. From Egypt to the Andes, from Sumer to the Pacific, early accounts speak of strangers who came from the sea, bearing knowledge older than the soil they stepped upon. We trace the first boats in art and text. Long, slender hulls carved into rock, reed bundles etched on cave walls, planked hulls pressed into ancient seals, and glyphs that hint at sailing before script. The styles differ, but their sudden appearance often aligns with sharp breaks in climate and culture, as if a thread had been passed rather than woven anew. Some traditions describe these visitors as tall, robed, and speaking in riddles, bringing tools, seeds, and measures of time as gifts. We followed this thread through place names, boat words in old tongues, and the sudden rise of navigation skills far inland. What these stories share is a sense of purpose. to restore order after flood, to light fires where libraries drowned, to carry structure into lands where chaos had risen with the waves. These teacher ships may have landed rarely, but they left deep marks on temple layouts, star myths, even legal codes once thought born in isolation. Some arrived on catamarans with sun symbols painted on their sails. Others moved upriver, with cargo not of goods, but of guidance. We found echoes in flood myths that end with a gift of law or a city plan passed down in whispers. In these tales, the survivors did not simply adapt, they remembered. And in remembering, they rebuilt something close to what had been lost. The seas may have buried their homelands, but their wisdom floated ashore. These ships were arcs in a deeper sense, not only to save life, but to restart meaning, language, and thought. Where a port once rang with trade, now a mountain temple watched the stars. Where once a senate met, now a circle of elders read the sky. The teacher ships carried more than tools. They carried the last breath of an old world, exhaled into the lungs of the new. If their stories are true, then the survivors did not drift. They navigated. They crossed waters with intention, charting not just maps, but futures. And where they landed, the world turned again, not with thunder, but with knowledge quietly handed from palm to palm. From the dusty grid lines of Mohenjo-Daro to the raised causeways of Kerala. A pattern repeats across early cities, as if drawn from a shared memory. Roads meet at right angles, canals divide quarters, and public squares rise with symmetry that speaks not of chance, but of intention. These civil plans appear suddenly, and without obvious trial and error. The placement of granaries beside reservoirs, of temples near market rows, suggests a blueprint refined elsewhere, tested, perhaps, on older coastlines now lost beneath the waves. Across regions with no known link, the same ratios appear. Streets aligned with cardinal points, courtyards scaled to human stride, drainage channels laid with uncanny foresight. In places like the Nile's edge, the Yellow River's bend, and the Indus Basin, we find city plans that arrive already mature. Rather than see this as isolated genius, we asked if the knowledge was carried, not born anew. We studied the length of bricks, the spans of roads, and the spacing of civic halls, and found echoes between lands separated by oceans. These were not improvised villages. They were civil machines, built to manage water, waste, and will. Even in highland towns far from ancient seas, we find the same building logic, a memory cast in mud and stone. Could these patterns reflect a system passed from hand to hand by those who once lived at the shore? Could a drowned civilization have taught not only how to sail, but how to settle? We looked closer at repeated measures, units that matched across early scripts, and tools that seemed designed for replication. Where a ruler appeared in stone, it often bore segments that matched other continents. This is the shadow of standardization, and it haunts the earliest ruins. And then there are the symbols, spirals, grid motifs, and alignment markers that tie celestial motion to city shape. These signs suggest the civil plan was not just about roads and walls, but also about time, ritual, and renewal. If trade moved goods, and teacher ships moved ideas, then perhaps the civil plan was their blueprint, a package carried to the highlands from flooded plains, a kit for rebirth, tested in the drowned cities of the coast, refined through loss, and deployed wherever people gathered again. These early cities were not built blindly. They seem to remember something, and in that memory may lie the echo of the first city, drawn with care, measured in stars, and erased by waves. Beneath the waves and buried in time, the libraries of ancient coasts dissolved in silence. In cities built near the sea, knowledge was once pressed into many forms: ink on papyrus, carvings on wax, dyes on hide, marks on wood. But salt, water, and time are harsh judges. Papyrus rots within decades if not sealed. Wax melts, wood splits, leather curls into dust. Only clay, etched and baked, endures the centuries. That is why inland cities like Nippur and Ebla left tablets, while shelf cities left none. We lose not just stories but charts, maps, and measures. The farther from fire and flood, the more text survives. Yet coastal centers, which often led in trade and timekeeping, wrote on what could not last. When floods came, they erased more than walls. They deleted memory. We are left with stone outlines and puzzling myths. In their absence, did survivors choose harder mediums? After loss, memory shifted into other vessels. Temple rituals, sung poems, star calendars etched in stone. We see stories retold as legends, advice wrapped in symbol. Some temples show layout as message. Some dances mirror sky paths. This was not just religion, but remembrance. The library became a ritual circuit. Even myths may hide real records, repeated to fix their shape across generations. The more fragile the book, the more sacred the spoken word became. In the oldest ruins, what remains is often stone, but shaped with skill, too precise to be random. Measures carved into lintels, alignments built to chase the solstice Sunday. It is as if the builders knew books would vanish, so they wrote into the landscape. We must read hills, walls, and rituals as their libraries. This forces a new approach. Not to search only for scrolls, but for message systems disguised in myth and city form. If a shelf city held archives, they are likely gone, swept into deep sediment, scattered by waves, turned to compost. But the ideas may survive in the patterns people built after. A law code may hide in a temple's steps. A flood chart may be carved into a cave's ceiling. Memory shifted media. In this, the lost library problem becomes not just a tragedy, but a clue. For those who knew they might lose the paper, chose to encode their world in the hardest stone they could find. And so we turn our attention not only to what has been found, but to what was never written, yet still remembered. Names, like river stones, shift shape as they pass from hand to hand and tongue to tongue. Atlantis in Greek, Atalan in Berber tales, Aztlan in the codices of ancient Mexico. These names echo across continents, yet none match cleanly. Each may mark a different memory, or the same one told through a different lens. We did not chase a one-to-one translation. Instead, we watched how names move, how vowels bend, how syllables migrate, how meanings fade. The core sound may survive, or the meaning may remain even as the word transforms. Atlantis, the island beyond the pillars, was recorded by Plato, who heard it through Solon, who heard it from the priests of Sais. Aztlan, the land of the 7 caves, was said to lie to the north of the Aztec migration. Atalan, in Saharan tradition, was a fertile land, now gone. Were they the same place? We did not insist, but we noted that all were tied to water, to migration, to collapse. The deeper pattern lies not in names alone, but in what they describe. Harbors, ringed cities, star-watching towers, floods, and a long journey inland. We found other drifting names: Ogygia, Antilia, Thule, Hybrasil, each a map marker for a memory half lost. Often, names carry more than sound. They carry maps in metaphor, signals in myth. When a place falls and its people scatter, they carry its name with them, reshaped by new soil and new speech. In this way, a port's name can become a mountain's, and an island can become a city in the hills. Some names split and echo, showing up in place names and tribe names across far corners. Others seem to vanish, only to rise again in coded forms. The point is not to fix Atlantis in one spot, or to claim Aztlan as proof. It is to follow the drift, to see where stories of sea loss and stone circles cluster. For names are not fossils. They breathe, and sometimes lie. What matters is the pattern. Ports remembered, rings repeated, stars watched with urgency. The real signature may not lie in a single word, but in the shape of knowledge that travels with it. Just as myths shift to fit new times, so do names, echoes of something older, whose root may never be pinned down, but whose shadow still crosses our maps. Trade once moved like clockwork across calm seas, salt for grain, metals for wool, stone for wine. But a sea empire lives or dies by timing. When seasons turned strange and storms grew longer, the system cracked. Grain ships waited in harbors, unable to sail. Salt pans flooded. Storehouses built for surplus now served as last lines of defense. In old ports, we found evidence of hasty repairs and thicker walls, as if the sea had turned against them. Markets, once measured by sun and tide, began to fail under clouded skies. A sea-based economy needs trust. Merchants must believe the boat will arrive, the ledger will hold. When climate shifts cut, sailing windows in half, loans soured, and goods spoiled. Salt, the ancient preservative and currency, became rare. When no ship could fetch it, meat rotted and hunger spread. These were not wars, yet they broke cities just as fast. We tracked collapsed docks and coin hoards buried and never claimed. A merchant might hide his savings before the storm, but if he never returns, the economy loses more than gold. It loses memory. Inland cities, once fed by coastal routes, show signs of rapid decline. Roofs fell in, streets filled with weeds, and foreign pottery vanished from the trash layers. In this silence, we heard the story of trade undone. The ocean that once tied towns together had become a threat. Unpredictable and cruel. It was not the flood that broke them, but what came after. The long years when no one could count on a sail appearing on the horizon. Even temples began to change. Offerings to sea gods grew desperate, as if hoping to bargain for calm. Contracts on clay tablets stopped mid-season. Suddenly, ledgers went blank. In these gaps we see how fragile order was. No enemy was needed. Only a few seasons without safe passage, a few ports closed by storms, and the market broke. Salt lost its measure. Grain lost its value. Kings lost their power. For a sea empire, nature's pause was as fatal as any sword. When the seas rose and coasts vanished, the first blow was nature's, but the second may have come from man. As lands drowned, people moved, families, villages, even whole cultures pushing inland. With them came hunger, memory, and desperation. River kingdoms that once flourished in peace began to show signs of stress. Fort walls grew thicker, and towns perched higher above the floodplain. Scarcity sharpened borders. Droughts followed floods, and grain became worth more than gold. In this tension, war found its opening. Ancient records from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond began to speak of raids from the sea, burning cities, missing harvests, kings fighting shadows from the surf. These sea peoples, as some called them, did not name their homelands. Perhaps because their homes had vanished under the waves. Their ships were fast, their attacks brutal, their presence sudden. Some may have been pirates, others, refugees with no other choice. In stone carvings, we see scenes of ship battles, lines of captives, and cities in flames. Yet behind these images lies a deeper question. Were these raids the result of aggression or of survival? A coastal empire broken by flood would have had skilled sailors, star readers, and fighters trained to guard port walls. If their cities sank, what remained was their fleet and a need to feed their people. River kingdoms with granaries full became targets, not out of greed, but of need. The unrest spread fast. Trade routes crumbled. Fortresses rose where markets once stood. In this chaos, some regions vanished from the record altogether. Their writing stopped. Their temples fell silent. War had followed water, not in conquest, but as a symptom of collapse. Even victors wrote with unease, as if aware that peace could not last if the waves kept rising and mouths kept multiplying. The sea peoples, if they were many or one, were not the storm. They were the echo of an older flood. In their wake, the ancient world tightened its grip on what it had left, and the memory of drowned cities grew darker, shaped now not only by water, but by fire and blood. Along the sunken edges of our continents lie shelves wide and quiet, but rich with buried clues. To test the idea of a lost maritime power like Atlantis, we must sift signal from noise with calm precision. The seas have erased much, yet certain shapes endure. Ringed lagoons should be mapped, natural circles that match the canal plans once described in ancient texts. Drowned deltas, now hidden beneath silt and tide, deserve core samples that could show a story in layers. Pollen shifts, soot bands, fine silts, and human debris. Not all patterns are made by hand, so sonar must be read with care. Still, right angles on the seafloor, particularly in patterns or repeated forms, deserve flags. Ancient harbors leave clues, straight cuts into stone, mooring holes, leveled platforms. Divers must learn to read the stone as much as any text, noting the polish of tool marks, the paths of water scouring, and the unnatural alignments in natural beds. No single find can stand alone. Claims must be judged against a clean checklist. Location fit with sea level curves, signs of habitation like charcoal or shell middens, layout harmony with known ancient metrics, and consistency across types of data: map, core, dive, and scan. A block is just a rock until its story is framed in context. That is why method matters more than myth. To move from legend to likelihood, every site must pass tests that are blind to belief. No team should search to prove, only to learn. That means logging failures, revisiting sites, and publishing clean negatives alongside wild hints. If a ring structure has no settlement debris, it may be just a reef. If cut stone lies deep but lacks tools, it may have tumbled there from a cliff. But if canals match curves, cores hold ash, and stone bears marks, then signal begins to rise. These shelves are vast and patient. Their silence can be broken only with care. The quest for Atlantis, or any lost sea power, will not be won by belief or by rush. It will be won by repeated, humble, well-planned work. A lost city must meet the tests that any ancient city must meet: evidence of life, of planning, of time. With this approach, mystery and science can walk the same path. The ocean hides no bias. It will reveal only to those who ask without presumption, and who listen with tools as sharp as the tides are deep. Off the coast of Portugal lies a stretch of continental shelf wide enough to hold forgotten stories. Western Iberia, with its layered geology and restless seas, offers one of the best natural laboratories for the search for a drowned canal city. Here, the land once extended far beyond the modern shore. Ancient valleys now lie beneath the waves, submerged by the same rising seas that erased so many edges of human memory. These drowned river mouths, carved when sea levels were low, are key. They would have drawn settlements in warmer times, flat, fertile, and fed by fresh water. But this coast is not still. It sits at the edge of storm tracks and above deep seismic faults. Tsunamis have visited these shores before. None more violently than the Lisbon event of 1755. Such forces could easily break a stone port, scatter its walls, and bury its canals under rolling sediment. Still, amid these dangers lie clues. Western Iberia is littered with known wreck grounds, layers of collapsed ships and cargo hinting at centuries of sea use. If a structured settlement once sat near these ancient lanes, it would now rest beneath layers of sand, bone, and rust. We mapped key targets. Shelf edges that match the depth of post-Younger Dryas flooding. Submarine terraces with gentle slopes, ideal for canals. And sediment fans thick enough to hide stonework. Between the Tagus River mouth and the Nazare Canyon lies a broad platform with multiple paleo channels. These corridors would have been ideal for harbor cities. We proposed fair survey lanes, wide grids for multi-beam sonar and side-scan sweeps, space to reveal both large features and subtle alignments. Core sampling would follow any anomalies, with a priority on delta edges and depressions that suggest human modification. What makes this case strong is not belief, but logistics. Portugal's proximity to both Atlantic trade winds and Mediterranean culture makes it a plausible hub for an ancient sea power. The geology allows for preservation. The history hints at echoes, and the tools now exist to test the ground without bias. Our checklist applies here with precision. Ringed geomorphology, tool marks in stone, fine silt harbor deposits, and carbon evidence of sustained living. If such a site exists, it should meet all four. The shelf off Western Iberia will not yield its secrets easily. But if a canal city once ruled the seas beyond the pillars of Heracles, this is one place it could have stood, hidden under layers of time, waiting not for belief, but for method. From the jagged shelf of Morocco to the volcanic shadows of the Canary Islands stretches a marine frontier full of possibility. This submerged arc once formed a gentle slope, extending far from the modern shoreline, an ideal candidate for lost harbors and drowned cities. Along this margin, currents weave in complex loops, cool Atlantic waters pushing southward, while wind-driven gyres stir sand into shifting dunes on the seafloor. Between them lie ancient terraces and sediment traps, now partly obscured by time. Our focus turned to these quiet thresholds. The shelves here descend in steps, and on certain levels, between 40 and 70 meters, lie the likely anchor points of a civilization that once hugged the low coasts. These depths mark the sea levels just after the Younger Dryas, when water rose fast and swallowed the edges of the Old World. Each terrace may hold a story. Smooth patches where silt settles, abrupt angles hidden beneath dune fields, and hollows where fresh water once flowed. The rivers that fed this shelf, like the Draa and Suze, now stop short of their ancient deltas. Their sediment plumes, once rich with organics and signs of settlement, now wash across the seabed and cloak it in a veil. But not all is lost. Using bathymetric scans, we traced subtle patterns. Sand waves that ripple over sharp edges, linear depressions too straight to be natural, and buried channels that may have hosted ports or canals. In these zones, human layers might rest beneath a moving skin of grains. Cores taken here must be deep, taken with care, and logged layer by layer. The target is not stone but signal. Pollen that doesn't match open ocean, ash from fires, charcoal flecks, tiny fragments of bone, ceramic dust, or even metal traces. We proposed a coring grid focused on mid-shelf terraces, aligned with ancient river mouths, and protected bays. These sites, now accessible with robotic arms and advanced sonar, are silent but not empty. The presence of submarine landslides and ancient fault scars raises the possibility that entire towns slid seaward in pieces. If so, we must look downslope, where ruins may have come to rest. But above all, this case depends on logic. The Moroccan coast faced the open Atlantic and received ships on the trade wind. The Canary Front sat as a stepping stone, halfway between Africa and the mid-ocean ridges. A fleet could stop here, resupply, then sail west. A culture that ruled the sea would not ignore these shores. If a city of rings and canals once thrived here, its ruins may not lie in plain sight, but under sand waves and silt fans. What survives could be small: a piece of dockstone, a pattern of clay, a layer of soot where a kiln once burned. But together, they would whisper of a past not drowned, only waiting to be read. When the coasts went under and the harbors fell silent, not all was lost. What could not be carried in hand was carried in mind. Survivors from drowned cities brought with them skills etched deep by repetition. How to lay stone that would not shift. How to read the stars when the seasons changed. How to draw water through land and shape it with purpose. These were not myths but methods, passed from memory into motion. In the uplands and along new river basins, early sites show a quiet precision. Canals dug with the fall of land, dwellings aligned to solstice light, and stones placed to catch echoes of nightfall. This order did not rise from chance. It bore the marks of continuity. After the Younger Dryas, when climates swung and seas surged, such clusters appeared almost suddenly. Places like Jericho, Mergar, and El Obeid emerged with patterns too refined to be first attempts. Grain storage came with calibrated measure. Walls followed rules that matched older ratios. These were not inventions born of trial, but the refinements of people who had already built before, and now rebuilt with urgency. Oral traditions from the highlands and deserts speak of teachers who remembered floods, who drew star maps in the dust, who taught the use of cords and plumbs to lift order from rubble. Masonry without mortar, timekeeping without clocks, and governance without writing suggest a scaffolding deeper than what the surface shows. In these communities, law was memory spoken in sequence, passed by elders who remembered the patterns of the drowned. Some myths echo this in strange ways. A lawgiver from the sea, a mountain council formed after a storm, a tower built to replace a ship. We traced such patterns and found them tied not to wonders but to discipline. Survivors did not seek to recapture glory. They sought to ensure stability. Their tools were stone and sky. Their math came in circles and lengths walked at night. The teachers they became were not gods, but witnesses. What they preserved was not magic. It was method born of loss. Across the ancient world, when the first bricks met the soil, they landed with memory, still warm in the hands that shaped them. These were not beginnings, but returns. And if one listens close in the stones of those early towns, in their drains, their plinths, their courtyards, one hears not the voice of invention, but the steady breath of survival. The civilization that rose again did not sprout from nothing. It grew from what the waters could not take. Skill, memory, and the quiet resolve of those who remembered how it once was and chose to begin again. The search for truth must rest on what we can measure, test, and share. With myths as our compass and geology as our map, we now turn toward the shelves, the sunken borders of the continents where stories and science overlap. To move forward, we laid out a clear research path grounded in transparency and collaboration. First, we called for the open use of public bathymetric data. Much of the seafloor has been mapped, yet only fragments are detailed enough to spot patterns of walls, canals, or harbor cuts. Governments and institutions hold terabytes of sonar data that, if shared, could unlock centuries of questions. Next, we emphasize the need for accessible sediment cores. These tubes of layered earth, drawn from beneath the waves, can reveal floods, fires, and human signatures. Pollen, charcoal, pottery, grit, even metal traces. When such cores are locked in private archives, their stories remain sealed. We proposed a system of open cores, catalogued and reviewed, with priority given to areas where ancient river mouths now lie offshore. Then come the cameras, ROVs that descend into the dark, streaming back images of cut stone, tool marks, or sediment drapes over suspect angles. We called for raw footage to be shared, not just curated stills. Too many claims float on single screenshots, without context or scale. With full video logs, peer review becomes possible. We invited museums and coastal communities to contribute as well. Often, fishing nets bring up strange artifacts, worked stones, odd fragments, or shaped blocks. These finds, logged properly and dated where possible, could build a network of clues. We urged museums to digitize and share such items, tagged by coordinates and depth. The citizen diver, the trawler captain, the shoreline walker, all hold pieces of this puzzle. Standards must follow. We set forth criteria: multiple confirming methods, clear provenance, depth alignment with sea level curves, and spatial clustering. A cut stone alone proves little. A pattern of walls beside a drowned delta, beneath silt dated to the meltwater pulses, begins to speak. The aim is not to chase legends blindly, but to test their echoes. We kept focus on regions where myth, memory, and geological change overlap. Places like the Azores Slope, the Bahama Banks, or the outer shelves of Iberia. There, the data is just close enough, the stories just old enough, to warrant careful, structured inquiry. With each new scan, core, or find, the map of the possible narrows. If the old world left its signature beneath the sea, it will not hide forever. What we need now is discipline, access, and above all, cooperation. Not every question needs to be answered with certainty, but every answer must begin with a test. The shelves are vast, but so too is the network of seekers. From sonar arrays to local lore, from deep cores to ship logs, we gather the tools to shift from wonder to evidence. And in that shift, the truth, whatever it may be, will have its chance to rise. If the tale of Atlantis holds truth, if a real sea empire once rose and then vanished during the Younger Dryas, then we are not just chasing echoes of the past, but warnings for the future. Such a fall would mean the myth was memory, etched in stone and passed by voice, telling how fast nature can reclaim even the greatest works of humankind. The Younger Dryas was not a slow fade. It struck with sudden cold, then reversed with brutal heat. Seas surged, coasts dissolved. Civilizations that leaned too close to the shore were swallowed whole. And if a powerful maritime culture once stood on now drowned ground, its erasure was swift and near total, not by sword, but by flood, fire, and quaking earth. This possibility forces a mirror to our modern world. Today, cities of glass and steel hug the water's edge, dense, rich, and blind to how quickly the tide can turn. The same forces still sleep under the ice caps and the fault lines. The same currents wind through the deep. If the old myth remembers truth, then Atlantis was not a fantasy, it was a forecast. Its loss became a caution passed in riddles, dressed in gods and giants so the story would be heard even when understanding faded. We called for clear eyes, open data, and shared tools. Not to prove a fable, but to test it. Not to glorify a lost age, but to understand its end. Because if it happened once, it can happen again. A shelf city buried by sand is not just a curiosity, it is a message in stone. A city plan beneath silt is not just a ruin, it is a lesson. The old coasts speak to us through myth, but also through cores, sonar, and currents. They urge us to ask not only what was lost, but why it was lost, and whether we are next. If Atlantis was real, then it marks a turning point where nature reminded humans of their place. And if it was not real, its shape still reflects fears and memories that trace back to real floods, real quakes, and real ends. So we treat the story with respect, not as believers, but as investigators. We do not search for gold or glory, but for the wisdom beneath the waves. The stakes are no longer mythical. Sea level rise, food stress, and coastal collapse are no longer theories. They are headlines. In that light, the myth of Atlantis becomes more than a lost city. It becomes a question. What did they forget that we must now remember? We end with a call not for answers, but for awareness. Let the search continue with rigor, patience, and unity. Let sonar and core and myth walk together. Because if Atlantis was real, the next Atlantis could be us.